What can you learn about an era from its movies? What does a decade say through its cinema? We're turning backwards in time to see what we can learn in retrospect with our picks for the top 9 movies of the 1990s. Kicking things off at number 9, we're starting as small as we can. And if you were a filmmaker, the 90s were a great time to be little. The decade saw dozens of filmmakers we now consider household names break their teeth on shoestring budgets in the newly emerging world of indie filmmaking. Richard Linklater bursts onto the scene with Slacker, Christopher Nolan self-funds following, Wes Anderson brings us Bottle Rocket right out of college, Robert Rodriguez debuts with his famously $7,000 El Mariachi, we get Gummo, and Trust, and Kicking and Screaming, and Pie, and Welcome to the Dollhouse, and, oh yeah, The Blair Witch Project. But if there's a favorite true indie to come out of the 90s, ours has to be Paul Thomas Anderson's debut, Hard 8.
Okay, I'm gonna light a cigarette now, old-timer. See, the thing is, I like you, and I'm gonna light a cigarette, and I'm gonna let you have this time to place your bet before I finish lighting this cigarette, and then when I finish lighting, I'm just gonna roll and you. The way you look, I think you know what I'm saying, old-timer. I think you do. Jesus Christ, why don't you have some fun? Fun!
Financed on the back of the success of PTA's short film Cigarettes and Coffee at Sundance, Hard 8 expanded on the concept in this old gambler with the past takes on a younger protege semi-thriller. And right from the jump, PTA is a 26-year-old freshman with an almost precocious taste. The characteristic PTA brilliances are all there. The way his camera moves, the way he handles dialogue, and the way he manages subtlety are all mature beyond Anderson's years, and a worthwhile showcase for the best the true indies had to offer. The 90s didn't just revolutionize filmmaking with a bunch of dudes taking out credit card loans in their bedrooms alone. A few small, agile companies sprung up that decided to bet that Hollywood was leaving money on the table and created a pipeline between obscurity and success that didn't previously exist. These were the mini majors: Artisan Entertainment, Lionsgate, New Line Cinema, and Miramax. They got a hold of PTA and gave us Boogie Nights and Magnolia. They gave us Swingers, Deadman, Metropolitan, Menace to Society, Twin Peaks, American History X, Clerks, The Player, Shawshank Redemption, Before Sunrise, Good Will Hunting, and so many more. But nothing was as impactful, as unforgettable, and as iconically 90s as Quentin Tarantino's origin story in the form of Reservoir Dogs.
Enough! You better start talking, asshole. Because we got shit we need to talk about.
Okay, let's talk.
Tarantino was all ready to make this film for $30,000 starring himself when Harvey Keitel called and helped him scrounge up $1.2 million, Tim Roth, Michael Madsen, and Steve Buscemi instead. And we're glad he did, because the film we ended up with is whip-smart, original as hell, and it quickly launched Tarantino into the stratosphere where he still takes up residence and stores his collection of disembodied feet. The narrative's freewheeling take on chronology set off a reevaluation of temporality in popular filmmaking, and the combination of massive critical and financial successes emboldened the mini majors to continue supporting original cinema. If you're wondering what the hell Hollywood was doing while all these great movies were getting made, first, they were pivoting around their corporate structures to make their own Hollywood brand of indie film, with no sense of irony at all. But with the rest of their considerable dollars, they made a ton of science fiction-y blockbusters with their newest, hottest CGI powers that actually did a surprisingly good job rising to the level of originality pressuring them from below. From Terminator 2 to Men in Black, to Armageddon, to Independence Day. From Starship Troopers on the one hand to Jurassic Park on the complete opposite. Titanic became the biggest movie of all time, but there's something enduringly special about the Wachowskis' endlessly watchable The Matrix. Barely slipping into the decade in '99, a year that saw so many fantastic films, it can only be explained by a collective Y2K fear that the world really was ending. The Matrix remains the benchmark for smart, original, high-concept blockbuster filmmaking that few films have reached since. The action is ultra badass even as the story grapples with philosophy. The world building is as rich as the relationships are lively and fun. It is unbelievably cool without the hypermasculine excess. And apart from the trench coats, it still feels forward-thinking, futuristic, and stylish to this day. The 90s was a big decade on the animation front too. Disney made a big resurgence, churning out Mulan, Pocahontas, Beauty and the Beast, and especially The Lion King. And in their wake, other companies moved quickly to capitalize on the newly revitalized market. Computer animation emerges in the form of Toy Story, Ants, and A Bug's Life. Claymation has some uncharacteristically big hits, especially with The Nightmare Before Christmas. Japan is gearing up for an anime golden age with Princess Mononoke and Perfect Blue, and who can forget about Space Jam? But it was Warner Brothers' other answer to The Lion King that is our favorite of the decade in the form of The Iron Giant.
Giant?
Oh God, you stay, I go. No following.
The Iron Giant was one of the first films to take the family genre seriously in a way that feels really prescient of the modern Pixar movie. And one doesn't have to look much past Brad Bird to find the common thread to that maturity. The Iron Giant manages to appeal to children and adults both, attempting and succeeding at operating on multiple levels at one time. Confident that a mature thematic backdrop of Cold War mistrust wouldn't alienate younger audiences as long as there was still a simple, powerful, emotional story about a boy and his new friend at its core. At the same time, but a whole lot less warm and fuzzy, the 90s saw an uptick in dark, simmering thrillers with a fresh run of neo-noir. With darker colors and brooding, shadowy postmodern violence around every corner, we'd like to say it had something to do with the Gulf War because it's a pretty vague answer that makes us sound cultured and smart. But it's probably just because Silence of the Lambs won Best Picture in 1991, and because the only way David Fincher stops the voices in his head from telling him to kill is by enacting their fantasies perfectly in his movies. And not to give it away early, because we sure do like listing 10 great movies only to veer off in the last second with a big however, but we're going with 7 on this one. In a decade filled with incredible films like The Fugitive, Primal Fear, The Sixth Sense, LA Confidential, The Usual Suspects, Eyes Wide Shut, Cape Fear, Heat, Fight Club, and The Game, it's still a pretty damn easy pick.
What about these bruises up here?
Well, I haven't figured that out yet.
Gun pressed against his head?
Pressed hard enough, sure.
Yeah. Marks from the front side flush with the muzzle. Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a homicide.
Another New Line smash success, 7 drips with grimy style, even as it cuts with the sharp edge of classic Fincherian perfection. In his own words, what could have been a typical police procedural ends up more of a meditation on evil, which was probably a great opportunity for him to work out some of that aggression he felt towards the film industry after Alien 3. First presenting as an impossibly chilling serial killer whodunit, Seven's investigation of deadly sin-inspired murders rips the rug out from under you as it upends the nature of its suspense, making a very solid argument for how knowing can actually be way scarier than not. In the 90s, the rest of the world was also having a landmark decade. Europe in particular makes a ton of great artsy films that fit right in with the indie revolution stateside, even though that's what they always do and have always done and isn't really any different than normal. Out of the UK, we get Trainspotting and Lock, Stock and 4 Weddings and Ratcatcher. Out of Italy, we get Life is Beautiful. Out of Germany, we get Run Lola Run. Out of Spain, we get the spectacular All About My Mother. Out of Greece, we get a whole lot of great Angelopoulos. In Poland, Krzysztof Kieślowski makes 4 masterpieces in his best decade yet. In Hungary, Bellatar makes just 1, but it's Satin Tango, so it evens out. But it is in France where we find our pick, alongside such honorable mentions as La Belle Noiseuse, Delicatessen, and Beau Travail, 1995's La Haine.
C'est l'histoire d'un homme qui tombe d'un immeuble de 50 étages. Le mec, au fur et à mesure de sa chute, il se répète sans cesse pour se rassurer. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Mais l'important, c'est pas la chute. C'est l'atterrissage.
Like a French do the right thing, the film follows 3 young minority men over the course of 24 hours in a French housing project amidst a period of conflict between ethnic minorities and the police. You feel an impending doom lurking on the horizon for these young men, even though their mouths are bigger than their actual criminal appetites. A sense of bleak inevitability. But despite the circumstances and the brilliant black and white cinematography to match, the film crackles with youthful energy, from its actors on screen to its lively staging and camera work. The kids are all right. So far, so good. The tragedy, though, is that there's really only one place for them to land. Of course, 90s global cinema wasn't just European. Beyond the West, it just keeps getting better. How about Iran, where Kiarostami gave us both Close Up and Life and Nothing More? Or Japan, where we got Afterlife and Audition? Or the rarely acknowledged New Zealand, where a young Peter Jackson made Heavenly Creatures? China gave us Farewell, My Concubine, Raise the Red Lantern, and Judo, while Hong Kong gave us the impeccable Chungking Express and a bunch of spectacular action flicks we covered in our last list. But it's Taiwan that takes the cake this time with the inimitable A Brighter Summer Day.
Wang 先生跟我们都是很好的朋友啦，他应该了解我们的做法。我们一定帮您查查看，如果镰刀会有任何错误，一定立刻改正，然后重新分发，这个您大可以放心。
Like Lain, A Brighter Summer Day is an illuminating examination of disaffected youth and criminal activity amidst political upheaval as it follows quiet young Seer gradually drifting off the academically promising right track towards delinquency and ultimately disaster in post-Chinese Revolution 1960s Taiwan. But at nearly 3 times the length with almost 100 speaking roles, it manages to extend its massive reach towards both the deeply personal and the very specifically political. It wraps its immense arms around struggles with identity as a culture and a teen, around young love, around the feeling of long summer nights, and encircles an almost hyper-specific recreation of time and place. Rounding us out genre-wise, it's time for the big two, comedies and drama. So let's start funny. The 90s was absolutely dominated by Jim Carrey at his Jim Carreyest, peaking in his only sort of comedy but very fantastic Truman Show. The Coen brothers made their funniest stuff in this decade, including Fargo and The Big Lebowski, and African-American comedy broke through into the big time with movies like Friday and Don't Be a Menace. And we got Election, and Mrs. Doubtfire, and Rushmore, and Clueless, and Office Space, and Forrest Gump, and Wayne's World, and freaking Groundhog Day. But the magic of the decade's indie powers were working in overdrive when our number 2 pick, Being John Malkovich, was made.
Malkovich.
In a year where the biggest hit was a sci-fi philosophy paper about leather-clad hackers, kung fu fighting robots in an alternate reality, Being John Malkovich is exponentially crazier yet. It's a testament to how bold Hollywood had gotten by the end of the 90s that a bunch of untested maniacs were given multiple 7 figures to make their first feature about a couple puppeteers who get addicted to taking a portal into the subconscious of actual actor John Malkovich. The movie is an absolute delight, hilarious and smartly bonkers in a way that just keeps escalating into an absurdist existential roar that we would name Kaufman-esque in the next decade. It exists with the rest of his work in a category of its own, and we're very glad there was a period of 10 years where everyone lost their mind enough to let it happen. And finally, when we get right down to the number 1, it's important to remember that the best picture only ever goes to #serious dramas. Somebody made that rule once, and now we all have to follow it forever without questioning it or rocking the boat. So, what do you got, 1990s? Did you make us cry? Did you pull our heartstrings about the issues du jour? You sure did. You gave us The Piano, and JFK, and American Beauty, and Philadelphia, and Dances with Wolves, and Saving Private Ryan, and Malcolm X, and Goodfellas, and The Thin Red Line, and The English Patient. But most of all, you gave us our number 1 pick. You blew our tear ducts to smithereens when you made Schindler's List.
It's Hebrew from the Talmud. It says, whoever saves one life saves the world entire.
Nowadays, when you hear about a Spielberg film, you automatically assume it's probably going to have some real import. But going into the 90s, he was mostly known as a really talented blockbuster filmmaker, until practically out of nowhere he goes from Hook and Jurassic Park to one of the most profoundly emotional and empathetic looks at the Holocaust, and it's actually spectacular. It would be like if J.J. Abrams had suddenly directed Manchester by the Sea. It would blow your freaking mind. Thank God these guys stopped doing all the cocaine they were doing in the 80s, because the result is honest, honest and heartfelt, and not at all as schmaltzy and pretentious as it feels like it should be. It's an easy pick, not because it's wrong, but because it gets you in the feelings for all the most right reasons, which is why it's our pick for one of the best films of the 1990s. So, what do you think? Disagree with any of our picks? Did we leave out any of your favorite 90s movies? How many movies can they make in 10 years? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more Cinefix movie lists.